I'm Romaine Buck here in the All Access studio, and joining me live here, fresh from the main stage, is Carla Harris, who is Managing Director and Vice Chairman at Morgan Stanley. Carla, thank you so much for taking the time
Well,
to
thank
be
you.
with us.
Thank you for having me, Romaine.
Absolutely a pleasure. So, fresh from the main stage,
Yeah.
a lot of great nuggets out there. I'd love to talk first about why was it so important for you to really double down on the concept of leadership when you were speaking to the audience
Yes,
today?
it was important for me to talk about leadership because I really wanted to give people some hardcore, tangible tools around how they needed to deploy their leadership and to be most impactful and to be most powerful. And especially to this audience, because this audience has responsibility for shaping and creating the next generation of leaders at their companies and then, frankly, in the world at large. So I wanted to leave them with some thoughts because so often, if we're in a producer culture, people get to the leadership seat because they have produced. They are a great trader or they're a great banker, but nobody's really taught them along the way how to lead or even how to manage. But all of a sudden, because you've been a great producer, now you have this responsibility and you have this title with really no thoughts about how you need to deploy or how you need to show up every day and be most impactful for those who are looking up to you.
That's such a really powerful point. I think a lot of us on the live stream have probably seen or had an experience where we had a leader who was put into a leadership role because they were successful and maybe didn't have the necessary tools to be an effective leader. So, in 30 years on Wall Street, you've probably seen the concept of leadership transition and change a little bit. Can you talk about that for us?
Sure, absolutely. And again, going back to your original question, Romaine, that's one of the reasons that I'm now talking about this leadership, because I realize that I've seen over and over and over people get to be head of this department or head of that department because of their production. And in fact, the first thing they say in the first speech is, I don't want to manage. I'm not going to meddle in what you're doing. I just really want to talk to clients. But when you get to that point, it really is around leading. And the transition has changed over time because if you think about the 30 years that I've been on Wall Street, we've gone from a transactional environment to a relationship environment to a transactional environment back to a relationship environment. And we're also in an environment now coming out of the financial services crisis where the relationships that you had with regulators, the relationship that you had with rating agencies, those were some of the most important relationships you could have if you were a bank of any kind. And knowing how to manage those relationships, which is very different than just sort of managing risk and, being sort of, a leader that was charismatic and just with the people that were within your organization. So it absolutely has shifted over time.
Absolutely. You talk about managing relationships, and also part of being a leader is managing your brand. And some of the advice that you gave on the stage was the idea that the most important decisions about your career are made when you're not in the room, which I love that. What are some of the things that people need to think about when they're managing their professional brand so that those conversations are positive for them?
Yes. The first thing that they need to think about is what's valued in their organization. In some organizations, it's around your logical thinking. Let's say, for example, if you are in a consultant firm. In other organizations like an investment bank, it might be around your quantitative skills, your analytical skills. If you are in a creative organization, an advertising organization, it's going to be, can you think out of the box? Can you think about new ideas? So the first thing, figure out what is valued in your organization. And then figure out how you can authentically show up that way every day so that when people are thinking about what a superstar looks like in their environment, then they can think about you, they can see you in that role because you are exhibiting that kind of behavior. Two of the most important questions that I think people should ask when they're in an interview and they're making the decision about whether or not they're going to go to place X or place Y is at the end of the interview when they say, do you have any questions for me? First question, give me the profile of a superstar in your environment. How would you describe a superstar? They're going to give you adjectives. Now you know what they value. And then the next question is, give me the profile of the last person you fired. When people don't make it in this environment, why don't they make it? Give me an example of what that looks like and how would you describe that person? Now you're going to figure out what they don't value. And if who you really are is aligned with what they don't value, that's probably an organization you should not go to. You're not going to be long-term successful. But if it aligns with how they define a superstar, it's probably the right environment for you.
Ooh, such great advice. And that goes right in line with the idea of authenticity in
Yes.
the workplace, which is something I know that you speak about quite a bit. Can you share with us how someone can make sure they're being their authentic self while still being successful within their organization?
Yes. The first thing, Romaine, is you need to know who you really are. How can you be your authentic self if you don't know what that is? So spend some time just with yourself. What kind of person am I when there's a crisis? What kind of person am I when things go really well? Do I cheerlead for other people? Is it all about me? Just be brutally honest with yourself. That's the first sheet of paper. Second sheet of paper, what kind of person would I like to be? Because just because you're this way doesn't mean you can't migrate and evolve into this. And then once you really realize who you are, then the way that you can be your authentic self in any environment is not to think you have to let all of that be on display at the same time. You can bring all of that in the room and just relax and meet people where they are. Now you can say, oh, is she playful? Does she like to take things lighthearted? Okay, well, the lighthearted Carla is going to talk to Romaine today. If she has a job to do and she's serious about that and she wants to be very focused, that Carla can show up. We're all multifaceted. And so if you go into any situations with no expectations, bringing all of who you are, in the moment, you figure out where somebody is and you meet them there authentically.
I love that. I know that you just recently spoke at the Harvard MBA graduation.
Yes, yes.
So people ready to take on the world from your own alma mater as well. So what were some of the things that that crew of people wanted to know from you? What were the pearls of wisdom they were dying to hear from Carla?
Yes. Well, I'm not sure they knew what pearls they were going to hear, but I'll tell you some of the things that I said to them. I talked about having courage, as I talked on this stage, because I realized how important that is. The more I travel, the more I meet people, I realize it's the lack of courage that is the impediment towards execution, especially when it's around change. I talked to them about being willing to change and not being afraid of change. I talked to them about fear. And almost every time that I'm on a stage, I talk about fear. I didn't really talk about it here, but generally I say fear has no place in your success equation, because it is the fear of success, the fear of failure, the fear of what other people are going to say. Again, that's the major impediment. So those are some of the things that I said to them.
Well, let's dive in on fear a little bit. If you don't mind being vulnerable with us for a little while. Can you talk about how fear has impacted you at different places in your career?
Yes. Yeah. Early in my career, I was absolutely afraid to, as I said on that stage, to call a thing a thing. When I didn't think that something was going right, I would convince myself, oh, nobody really cares, or maybe that's the wrong person for me to speak to, or maybe I'll get fired if I say something about it. So it was fear, fear, fear. When then at the end of the day, all I had to do was to voice it. And the minute I did voice it to the right person, the situation was changed. But for months, I remember one situation in particular, for months I suffered. And my father told me to go and talk to the head guy. And I said, oh, my daddy doesn't understand. He hasn't been in a Wall Street environment. He hasn't gone through this. I can't do that. 3 months later, after suffering more, I ended up doing it. And it was absolutely the right call. And I realized it was just fear. It wasn't that I didn't have the words. It wasn't that I couldn't say it impactfully, but I was scared. I was scared.
Scared sometimes.
So I just tell people, fear has no place in your success equation. And then you tell yourself, frankly, Romaine, what's the worst that could happen? Okay, so I may get fired, but you know what? I got this job. If I got this one, I'll get another. What's the worst that could happen? They're angry and, right? So if you get yourself comfortable with the worst that can happen and realize that you will live to fight another day, then you execute.
Would you say that is the single biggest lesson you've learned in your 30 years on Wall Street, is to overcome your fear?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's the single biggest lesson. The single biggest lesson is the one I talked about on the stage, was that perception is the co-pilot to reality. How people perceive you will impact how they deal with you. And more importantly, that you can teach people to think about you in the way you want them to think about you. That was the single biggest lesson.
Fantastic. Carla Harris, thank you so much for joining us. Such a pleasure.
Well, thank you,
to
Romaine.
speak to you today. And I also understand that you have a book coming out soon.
Well, I actually have 2 books that are out, and I'm in the process of writing the 3rd. So Expect to Win was released in 2009. Strategize to Win was released in 2015. And Beep, I won't say what it is yet, but it's along the same lines. That should be out in 2019.
Fantastic. Looking forward to that next year, Carla. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And we are going to send it back to Talent Connect 2018. Thanks for joining us on the live stream.